Okay, well, welcome everyone to our fourth series in the webinar held by Gregory Nicolaou from the Australian Childhood Trauma Group. Again, we're really excited to have Gregory join us. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we're all meeting today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Carissa Inglis and I am the Service Support Manager here at Queensland Foster and Kinship Care. So this is, like I said, the fourth in a sixth series of live webinars that we are doing. Now, you'll note that the third one hasn't gone onto our website. We're just experiencing some technical issues with that. Because we had some of the cameras turned on, there was things happening in the backgrounds of our carer households that we need to make sure that are not visible before we put them up onto our website. So we are working on that, and the third edition will be on our website as soon as we're able to get it on there. You'll note that all cameras and mics are turned off today. You will have an opportunity to ask questions. This webinar will go for an hour, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of that. Please note that the session is being recorded, so any questions that you do ask in the chat function at the end of the session needs to ensure that confidentiality is maintained. So only general questions only. If you have specific questions in relation to children and young people in your care, we ask that you contact our office and ask to speak to one of our case officers. So that's all of the housework stuff that I need to get through, or housekeeping stuff that I need to get through, and I'd love to pass over to Gregory, and thank you once again for volunteering your time for our Queensland carers and community sector.
Thank you so much, Chris. Hello everybody. I can't see you, but I can see names. I can see CC, SB, JK. I can say hello Carolyn, Stephen, Jan, Gina, Ebony, Julie, Paula, Connie, Deborah, Masayo, Natasha, Anne, Renee and Stephen. I don't know if there are more people there on that list, but the other ones I can see. So a very good morning to you. I'm down here in Melbourne. Chris was trying to tell me if there's a cold chill up there, it's going to be a top of 18 or 19 degrees in Brisbane. And I'm sitting down here and it's 8 degrees with a chill factor of 5 degrees. So I have no sympathy for any of you up there whatsoever because it's much colder down here. Although originally I come from Dunedin, so it's probably about -3 in Dunedin at the moment. Now I'm just going to, people keep popping up in my face there. I don't know whether, oh, there it's gone. Hello, Hayley, welcome. I thought this was number 3, but maybe it is number 4. I don't know. I was looking at the list before and it said this was number 3. Did we do one before we started the series of 6? I think we did, didn't we? Is that what we did? Yeah, we did one and then we decided to do a series. I think that's what happened. And we're up to number 3 in the series of 6, but it's number 4 in the overall bits. Now, if you haven't, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see how my screen goes. By the way, as I go, if you need to ask any questions, please put them in the chat and somebody will interrupt me, Carissa or Danny or somebody out there, just say, Gregory, there's a big question here. If there is a question during this webinar, I'm absolutely happy to answer it, but also there'll be time at the end to ask questions. I tend to go for about an hour and so, and then we have time for questions. We're going to finish at 11:30 my time. Is that 11:30 your time still? Yes, we're on the same time. Thank goodness for that. So here we go, share screen. Let's see if this works. Put it up there and I'll go share. Hopefully you can all see a screen that says Creating Hope Healing. Every child has the right to feel safe and to thrive. And there's some kids there. And if I click this, we'll get to the front page. Now, just check, you're meant to be here with the webinar called Joining Together, How Relationships Form with Children Who Do Not Trust Adults. Just in case you are here going for Mechanics 101 or something like that and you have come to the wrong webinar, that's what we're doing. My name's Gregory Nicolaou. I'm the founder of Australian Childhood Trauma Group and I'm a consultant psychologist. I stood down about 2 years ago as CEO because I thought I needed a change. And as part of my transition and change, I'm doing some webinars and seminars for people out there in the out-of-home care sector, just as my way of saying thanks for supporting me over the last 40 years of my work, and I'd like to give something back to you all. So let's get going. First, I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm sitting on, the Wurundjeri people of the Great Kulin Nation, acknowledge my acknowledge elders past and present, and those who may be elders into the future, and I pay my respects. I know you've done that also up there in Queensland, wherever you are. The journey so far, so I just want to talk a bit about where we've come from, just in case there are some people out there who are coming to this seminar first up. The webinar, actually, the webinars are recorded, and you should be able to look at the other webinars online. There is one, Chris was saying we're having some technical issues. The technical issues, and they've given it to me because in my past life, I went to film school, believe it or not, and I still have some editing skills. And I'm going to edit out all your faces that happen to be. And the reason is some children ran across the screen, and we can't have children in our webinars going out to public for issues of safety and confidentiality, of course. And I'm still working on that, but not far to go. But this is what we've done so far. We started off in this series with a webinar called Mad, Bad or Sad, a Pathway for Healing for Carers. And in that webinar, we talked about a lot of things, but really setting the scene for what sort of environment you need to create in order to heal children who have experienced harm. I've often said to carers and caseworkers that love is not enough when it comes to caring for kids who have adverse childhood experiences. And when we say that, we're talking about sexual, physical, emotional abuse and neglect. We'd like love to be enough, but it's not. It's a starting point. It's a starting point. And if you thought as a carer what was going to happen is you were going to open your house up to these children and bring them in, and then everything, the magic was just going to happen automatically, probably by now, certainly if you've been a carer for, well, a few months, even a few years, you'll discover it's not quite as simple as that. And one of the things, the takeaways from that Mad, Bad or Sad, well, I hope was the takeaway, is that behaviour is neither good or bad. And we have this habit of cutting behaviour in two. We talk about behaviour that's good when we reward those children, say, well done, fantastic. And then we talk about behaviour that's bad. And to those children, we tend to vilify in some way, punish, discipline, and so forth. And what I was trying to bring across is that for us to think about behaviour in a different way, that actually behaviour, no matter what it is, no matter what's been presented to you, is actually communication. And some people have better skills than others at communicating clearly. And we know that children who've experienced harm very often, developmentally, aren't at the point they should be as they travel through their journey of life. So we might see a 5-year-old that when they're under stress acts more like an infant. We might see a teenager at the age of 15 when they're under stress, when they're being challenged, they look like they're acting like a 5-year-old. And the reason for this is that they haven't developed the skills necessary to be where they are developmentally. And this gives us a little bit of a clue that when we're trying to create environments, and the work we do as carers and or caseworkers is to improve the developmental outcomes for children. And I'm a great believer that what we should do every day is this child in my care, this 5-year-old, this 8-year-old, this 12-year-old, this 13-year-old, this 17-year-old, under stress, do they operate, do they meet my expectation? In other words, if I have a look at all the other kids that maybe have been in my own life, my own children, my own 17-year-old or 12-year-old or 5-year-old, and they've been raised having supportive parents, and they've met their developmental milestones all the way along, is this child pretty much doing the same as them? And if they're not, it gives us some clue as to what we need to do, that is the interventions we need to put in place to improve their developmental outcomes. The second seminar was called Getting Started, Preparing Your Mind and Your Body. The best tool you have as a carer and a caseworker, whoever you are working in the field, out-of-home care field, the best tool you have is your mind. And the second tool you have is your body. And the reason those two are important, one is your mind. If you have if you stay focused in your thinking mind, you're able to ask the question, what's the best thing for me to do right now? When a child might be looking at you and swearing and cursing and carrying on. I'll try not to swear. Nothing worse than swearing in a webinar and it's recorded and somebody just takes that little part where I swore and uses it as a little, what do you call those things? When people take a little tiny piece of a video and they put it on a loop and keep repeating it. There's a name for it, but I've forgotten what it is. So I'll try not to. I do sometimes, purely in training. Anyway, the importance is that you stay in your thinking mind and not end up in your reptilian brain. And why is that? Because you need to be the water on the fire and not the fuel. The water on the fire and not the fuel. And so what we said in getting, I introduced you a concept called Dadiri. And this was by a concept wildly put forward by Miriam Rose Ungamar Barman, who's a great Aboriginal elder, and she's also 2021 Australian Elder Australian of the Year. She talked a lot about this idea of Dadiri. And in a video I showed, she was suggesting that in order to be with children, in order to work with children, we need to remember to do several things. And the things were, one, to breathe. And breathing's important because when we can be in control of our breath, it keeps us in our thinking minds. If we lose control of our breath, like in a panicking situation, we also lose control of our thinking minds, and it leaves us reacting to situations rather than responding. The second thing is, she said, if you're breathing and you're calm in your breath, you're able to listen deeply. When I invited people to think about listening deeply, I wasn't just thinking about the noises you hear out there. And there can be a lot of noises, of course, you hear out there. But I wanted also people to think about the listening deeply we can do inside ourselves. Because sometimes there can be a lot of noises in our heads that get in the way of us focusing on what the child might need. And when we're not really focused on what the child needs, we might miss what they need. We might react when they're yelling and screaming at us, when they're not following our reasonable instructions. Instead of being curious about what they're doing, we might, in fact, as I said, react to it. So we need to breathe, listen deeply. What's the noise inside me that's getting in the way of being able to attend to the child? If we can do this, breathe, listen deeply, it allows us to connect, which actually brings us into our webinar today, because the webinar today is in fact about connection, about relationship building. And it's the most critical part of the therapeutic relationship between the child and the carer, or child and caseworker, your ability to connect. And finally, Miriam also said you can't hurry the river, and I added to it, change takes time. And I'm going to show you a little bit later on, which I've done in the last webinar, but I've got a contextual piece that I want to show you today for you to understand that this work takes time. As I said, if a child comes into your care for the first time, and if you think overnight that child is going to be your best friend and is going to love you dearly, you'll be sorely disappointed. And over the years, I have seen terrible things happen for children and for carers because expectations are not met. Some years ago, I was consulting with carers who said they couldn't do this work anymore because the child who came into their care for the first 5 nights had just stayed in her bedroom and wouldn't come out. And they couldn't understand it because they were providing this wonderful home for her to be cared by. And I had to ask them to think about what it might be like for the child who's just come into their care for the first time. That is, for them, in her life, they are strangers. And that the expectation is that she'll somehow fall into their way of being in their world, when she's come from a very different world. So it's really important for us to think about these things. So what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to talk about how relationships form. And if anybody's looking for a hot date, I'm not offering myself up, but I'll use a nightclub as a sort of an example of how relationships form. my days of night clubbing have sorely passed me by, but I still like dancing. I still like a bit of, freak out with disco music from the 70s and the late 60s. It's sort of still my time. I'm going to also talk about credits in the VAR. So these are two practice models, and a practice model is simply a model that you can actually use in the work you're doing in your day-to-day life, in your day-to-day work with children and care. And it doesn't matter if you're a foster care or a kinship care, or if you have permanent carers, it doesn't matter who you are, or if you're a caseworker, you can all do these things in terms of helping and healing children in your care. And we'll talk a bit again about behaviour change, but in particular in relation to relationship building, that is connection, how that forms and what children do in terms of their behaviour when you try and form a connection with them. So, how do relationships form? Well, actually, I've got a little, before I go into that, I'm going to stop sharing. Stop sharing. So here's when, and I don't know if Danny's locked your microphones or if you've locked your own, but if we can unlock microphones just for a moment, because I've got a question for you. I want to ask you all, your experience of forming a new relationship, how did it happen? What went on? And it could be that you're at a nightclub and someone came up and said, "Oh, g'day, how you going? You want to have a dance? You want a drink?" Or whatever it happened to be. I want to know, what did you do? What was going on inside you when you began forming this relationship? And tell me a bit about your journey. Is there somebody who's willing to do that? You might have to put your hand up or scream out, or how do we unlock their microphones, Danny? Can we do that? Can we?
Yeah, we've done it, Gregory. The microphones should be enabled now. So if someone wants to try.
So someone, there we go. Carolyn, are you going to say something? You've unlocked.
It's a bit, I was just testing it out. It's a bit hard. I actually met my husband when I had finished work and I was walking home with my girlfriend, and he was riding up and down the streets and following us, and I actually accepted a ride home with him, and from there our relationship formed slowly. He took my girlfriend home, and we spent the next hours just riding and talking, and then he took me home.
So I suddenly had an image. I thought I heard you say he took your girlfriend home. He was meant to take you home.
No, we were both together from work.
Oh, I see. You took both of you home.
Home first, and then he proceeded to take me home the long way round, and we just talked.
Oh, I see. He got rid of her. He said, I'm interested in this one, so I'll get rid of you, and then we'll get
right. It, yeah.
And so, Carolyn, tell me, I'm interested. When he said, "Look, I'd like to take you home," what was going on? Do you remember what went through your mind about all that?
Well, yeah, I shouldn't be getting a lift from a stranger to start with.
Oh, yeah. So you're a bit suspicious?
Yeah. No, yeah. He was very easy to talk to, and yeah, I really don't know that anything was going on. Just that we were talking and communicating.
Okay.
Was good. And we ended up getting married and having.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations. Of course, we're going to be a bit careful to see people. We're just having a conversation. He seemed really nice. We do know that particularly with children in out-of-home care, we know some of the people have spoken to them are very nice, but in fact want to take advantage of them. Not that I'm saying he wanted to take advantage of you, Carolyn, but yours was a Hollywood ending. You got married and went off into the sunset and so forth. Anybody else have a similar or different experience of the beginning of a relationship? That's willing to share, that is. Anybody there? Just speak up if you are. If not,
Gregory, we've got some comments in the chat tab. If you've got that available.
Let me have a look at them. Jacob, assess the person. I like to say you assess the person. So Jacob's saying that when someone shows some interest, and it doesn't matter what type of relationship, he did some sort of assessment process. Eye contact, trust, and being open to open yourself up to show who you are. So someone said, I needed to sort of show something of myself in order to find out whether this person was what they were going to do with it. I like that. There's a name for this. This is really good. You've almost built out the model that I'm going to show you. Sharing of some personal information. You're giving out something that's personal and seeing what's going to come back at you. Okay, thanks for those. I'll just click there. Test and challenge the person. Again, this is in the model I'm about to show you, so I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Here we go. Share screen. Okay. Oops. Quick. So we're going to talk about joining together. So in these models, most usually there are 3 parts to relationship building, which basically people have just shared with me. The first part is this. It's called reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. I have to confess, I developed this model out of my military experience. So I was in the army. That's how I came to be in Australia. I was an officer, and we were out in the bush. What we would do is the first thing we would go into what's called a, if we were looking for the enemy, we would go and do some reconnaissance and intelligence gathering to try and find out what was going on and what was their strength and how many weapons did they have and how big were they and all those sorts of things. So in fact, this is what we all do, but children who have experienced difficult and broken relationships, who have experienced abuse and have experienced adults doing things to them that we would not expect adults to do, they are very sensitive to this area in the first part of the relationship. But we all do it. As people said, I assessed them, I gave them some personal information, see what they do with it. This is all part of reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. And from a child's point of view, they're trying to work out 3 or 4 things. They want to know whether or not you can be trusted or you're going to hurt them in some way. They want to know whether maybe you're the captain of the ship or the driver of the school bus. Or are you going to be a good coach or a poor coach? But they also try and work out whether you're an easy mark. That is, the relationship becomes transactional and they think, when I want stuff, I can manipulate you. Imagine a teacher in a classroom and a child comes up and says, "Oh, miss, I saw you've got some chocolates on the desk there. I promise I'll be good today. I won't repeat what I did yesterday if you give me the chocolates." And if the teacher's an easy mark, they go, "Oh yeah, all right, I'll give you the chocolates." And the child kind of sort of does okay that day. And the teacher thinks, "Oh, that was lucky. We didn't have any meltdowns." And the next day, the problem with an easy mark is the child comes and says, "Oh, miss, I was good yesterday when you gave me the chocolates. If you give me some more chocolates, plus I noticed there's a movie pass on your desk. If you give me that too, I'll be good again today." And the problem is the ante is just upped and upped and upped. And the teacher ends up needing first-class tickets around the world to get this child to be good for a day. And you don't want to be an easy mark. The only person you want to be is the captain, the ship, or the driver of the school bus, or the good coach. And in this reconnaissance and intelligence gathering phase, the child's going to go, "Well, I've got to work this out. How do I work it out?" Well, border incursions, as some of you in your examples of relationship building talked about. I'll share some personal information. That's a border incursion, otherwise known as testing behaviour. I'm going to put something out there and see what you do with it. And so this is what these children do. They say, "Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try something. I've just come into your care." And you might notice, for those of you who have been carers for some time, excuse me, for some of you who have been carers for some time, you might notice when a child first comes into your care, the first hour or day or week or even month might seem relatively smooth. And what you need to tell yourself from this day on is that relative smoothness is because during the reconnaissance and intelligence gathering phase in the early stages, the child will be calm. If you've ever watched a lion or a wolf looking for its prey, it's doing reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. It's doing it very quietly. And children do this too. And when we're out in the bush, when we were doing in the army doing reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, we didn't walk through the bush going, "Hey, where are you? Come on, show yourself. Hurry up, where are you? I can see, come on." Because what would happen, of course. So what we did is we walk stealthily through the bush. until we made contact. And children do exactly the same thing. We call it reconnaissance intelligence gathering. And you would have done it at the beginning of your relationships. You'll be nice to people, no matter who they are. And it's not until we get some more data that suggests, actually, I'm going to be different. And that extra data comes about over time, and it gets worse before it gets better. That extra data comes about as the child tests you in your care. And maybe simple things to begin with. You ask them to get up and they don't get up. You have to go back and ask them again. And each time they ask you, hey, or rather each time you ask them to get up and they say no, they're looking out for your response. Are you responding or reacting? Are you staying in your thinking mind, or are you getting agitated because the child won't get up and you've got 3 other children to get off to school and they're going to make you late and you've got to get off to work or whatever it happens to be? And so the energy inside you starts to shift and you're starting to go like this. And that's what the child's looking for. And what are they looking for is they're starting to go, oh, maybe this person's not going to be a safe person to be with. Because maybe when I'm stressed or when I can't deal with things and I get upset and disruptive or withdraw and close down, maybe instead of being empathic and curious about me, perhaps you're going to get angry with me or send me to my room or shame me in front of other people. So this is quite difficult stuff at the beginning of a relationship, because the child's trying to work out, are you in control of yourself or are you going to be controlling of me? And the problem with you being controlling of the child is that abuse is about someone having power over somebody else and taking advantage of that. So you cannot afford to show the child in this early stage of the relationship that you are a controlling person. You need to show them that you are in control, and that's where we come back to Dadiri and breathing and listening deeply inside yourself. And when a child is being disruptive, in your mind, disobedient, not follow reasonable instructions, rather than being angry, I invite you to be curious. What I'm asking you to be curious about is, what's the child trying to get at the moment? What are they doing? And if you start, the way you use this model is to say with the child, you say, hey, time to get up, sweetie. And the child says, fuck off. There we go. You have to edit that one out. And it says, off you go. You will be. If they say that, rather than you going, oh, I can't believe they swore. Oh, no. You know, what's going to happen? How dare you? You have to go. You have to get into a curious space that goes, oh, that's interesting. And you might say something like, because we're in the reconnaissance intelligence gathering stage, oh, that was a word I wasn't expecting from you. I imagine you're using it because you want to see how I might respond to you. And if I do this in that calm way, you'll get a kind of, you know, when a dog, you talk to a dog and the dog's head goes, it's a kind of response you'll get from a child because you're not meeting their expectation. Their expectation is you're going to hurt them or yell at them or tell them off. And all of a sudden you've done something quite different. And so they end up going, huh? And their little brain is going, what's this? What happened? That's not what I expected. And so they go, well, maybe they're just pulling the wool over my eyes, so I'll try something bigger. And you come back in and say, come on, get up. And they pull the sheets over themselves and say, if you don't get out, I'm going to smash the window. And again, your response can go 2 ways. If you break that window, I'm going to call the police. Or, gee, I didn't realise you wanted to stay under those covers for so long that you're actually willing to break something to get the message across. These are very different ways of operating, but the more you can be in this space, the more quickly you move through these border incursions, and this testing behaviour gets less, not more. But if you can't get through these 2 phases, you actually end up stuck here. And if I look at placements that have broken down, they tend to break down within 6 months. because people get stuck in this place. And there's a dance, I call it the Cartman dance. There's a framework called Cartman's Triangle. I'm just going to tell you, I'm just going to stop sharing again because when I talk about this, I don't have a slide on this one. Just makes it bigger and you can see me in full view, hopefully. Am I in full view? I'm on the big screen. So I could be in the movies. To be or not to be, that is the question. I could be Errol Flynn. No, sorry, just get carried away there. Cheap laugh, I know, dad joke. Someone's itching their head there going, that. I think it's Lisa going, I can't believe he told a joke like that. That's not even funny. Anyway, here we go. So Cartman's Triangle works like this, and it's to do with relationships. And it happens when you get stuck between this reconnaissance and intelligence gathering and border incursion phase. And you can have different roles depending who you can be caught in several different Cartman's triangles. And it goes like this. Somebody in the triangle says, I'm the victim here. And often in a case where the child's getting the better of you, you as the carer or worker, you'll be the victim. You're going, poor me, that child's terrible. Can't believe the things she's doing to me. It's all his or her fault that I get angry with them. So victim. And what happens is, as a victim will look for a rescuer. Sometimes I change that word to colluder. They'll look for somebody who's going to say, yes, that kid's terrible. And it might be a neighbour, it might be your partner, it might be the caseworker comes to see you and they say, that child shouldn't be doing that. That's disgusting. Well, we'll have to sort that out. Might be a teacher who says, yeah, he does that in class too. I think we've got to join together and get him. And so we've got these two people working together, and then we have the persecutor, and the persecutor is the one that you believe is doing stuff to you. And in this case, it's the child. So the child in that Cartman triangle is the persecutor. You know, they're taking it out on you, the carer or the worker, and you're trying to find someone to help you against this. And this triangle is terribly destructive. It's terribly destructive. There are no winners in this triangle. And the funny thing is, as I said, you can be in more than one triangle. So from the child's point of view, they don't see themselves as a persecutor. Guess who they see themselves as? Someone can say it. Begins with V. Victim. Yes, whoever said that is correct. I think it was me, so I'm correct. Is the victim. The child sees themselves as the victim. And then they go looking for a rescuer or colluder, someone who's going to, and the caseworker might come in and talk to them about what's happening. They say, it's not fair because that carer makes me to go to bed at 8 o'clock. And when I is at home, I was allowed to stay up to 1 o'clock playing games and they won't, blah, 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 blah. And the carer who's a mad gamer, the caseworker who's a mad gamer themselves says, well, that doesn't sound too good, is it? I stay up until 1 o'clock too playing games, sometimes 3 o'clock. You should be allowed to do it too. I'm cartooning this a little bit, but you get the picture, I'm sure. And so then these two people, and the poor carer becomes the persecutor, doing terrible things to these people, having outrageous expectations. And when you end up in this dance, it is completely destructive because there's no way to get out of it. Well, there is a way to get out of it, but if you're stuck still playing that role, you have to stop playing the role. If you think you're caught in a Cartman's triangle and you think you're in there and someone's made you the victim, you've got to step out of the victim role. If you're a persecutor, you've got to step out of the persecutor role. If you're a rescuer or a colluder, you've got to step out of that role. And as soon as you step out of that role, and if you stay the course, the Cartman's triangle collapses because it needs 3 parts to it to be a triangle. Hope that makes sense. But think about it. Think about what is your relationship with this child, and are you caught in this thing? And it always has to be the adults who initiate getting out of the Cartman's triangle, irrespective of who created it. You cannot expect a child to take responsibility for the Cartman's triangle and to try and step out of it to break it up. It's got to be the adults. Kids don't have the skills in order to do that. and we shouldn't expect them to have those skills. So if you work your way through this over time, what you end up with is you get into this joining together phase, and it's light on at the beginning, but it gets stronger. You can see it gets much stronger. It has a much stronger base as time goes on. And as time goes on, if you've worked through this reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, border incursion phases, this reconnaissance and intelligence gathering absolutely tails off. Same with border incursions, they tail off, and you have the strong connected base with which to work and do healing with. But to get from here to here, we're not talking weeks. We are talking months. In fact, get about the halfway point. I hear people saying, I've got a great relationship. They've been with a child for 3 or 4 weeks. 3 or 4 weeks, you're here somewhere. To get to here, you're looking about anything from 6 to 8 months. There are some shortcuts people might, because they continue to be curious and they stay in their thinking mind no matter what the child does. And you may find some carers and workers can make this happen in 3 to 6 months. But to get way up here, we're talking about 12, 18 months, 2 years. Because you are creating neurological changes in the brain, and these neurological changes we're talking about are to do with attachment. Because a child, and we spoke about this, I think, in Mad, Bad or Sad, adverse childhood experiences impact the neurology of the brain. So as a little infant, I'm just going to, where's that? Stop the sharing. As a little infant, you're holding them and you're going, could you, aren't you beautiful? I love you. And you're feeding them. You've got this enormous firestorm, neurological firestorm in the brain that's making these connections. And the important connections it's making is attachment. A pathway, a neurological pathway that says attachment. And the more you meet the needs of that baby, could you, I love you. The more you do that and you're excited and you're smiling at the child, as they grow older, infant into childhood, they form a really strong connection around attachment. And the reason this is important is because if you've got a strong neural connection around attachment, it means you can go on and have positive relationships. But often the children who come into our care, when they were crying and saying, I need to be fed or I need to be soothed because I need to go to sleep, when they were doing that, but nobody answered the call, or a parent was sort of feeding it but talking over there, or the parent was so high they couldn't meet the face of the baby, then instead of these neural connections firing and doing this, they atrophy and they die. So that means a child who doesn't have early on strong connections, strong neurological pathway for attachment, finds it very difficult to form relationships. And that is why it takes so long for the child to be able to form a relationship with you, the carer or worker. And it's my way of saying change takes time. You can't hurry the river. Don't give up. But before you remember, I talked about strong mind, but I also said strong body, and I forgot to say why it's important to have a strong body. It's because you actually need not just to be psychologically fit, but also physically fit when you're managing these kids. Because it takes a lot of energy, even just to keep up with them. And you need to be able to keep up with them. And if you're with a child and you can't get down on the floor with them and then get back up again, you might need to say, well, who else do I need to call into my sphere of influence who is able to get down on the floor and get back up again? Because you have to be able to meet the child wherever they are. And sometimes that means getting down on the floor. I'll go back to share again. I hope that, so if you're the captain of the ship, driver of the school bus, this enables you to form this relationship. And to do all the healing work you need to do, you've got to get into the space with the child. You have to work your way into it. And you have to spend time allowing the child to test you and to demonstrate to them that you're going to be the water on the fire and not the fuel. Okay. Oop, click. So let's talk about credits in the vase. I'm going to use this again to think about relationships as you're doing this work. So this credits in the vase framework is connected to what we call internal working model. Now, I don't know if you know, but all of us have an internal working model. Does anybody want to hazard a guess what an internal working model might be? This is when you can flip off your microphones and say, I think it's this. Anybody willing to shout out? Maybe I just point at someone. You say something. Anybody? What's an internal working model? See, this is where I don't like Zooms as much as I like being in the room, because people are there and they can't escape. So I'm right there and I can come up and say, what do you think? And I can then say, come on. Whereas you're just these circles, discs on my computer. Natasha, what about you? What about Deborah, Julie, Gina, Carolyn, still with heaven, Carolyn, Stephen, Jan, another Stephen, Renee. Got any thoughts? Who's crying? Oh, is that someone?
Mike's
Lisa, anybody?
I'll go to the chat though as well. Someone might have.
Oh, chat. I always forget about chat. Someone keeps using chat. Okay. Where is it? No, there's nothing in the chat. Unless I'm reading it wrong. No. Okay. Moving on. I'm going to tell you, since nobody will tell me, an internal, hold on, template of what your relationship means, e.g. to be a father. Hey, whoever said that? Nice one. That is part of it. So the internal working model is your kind of value and the way in which you see and define yourself and the way you look out at the world. So is the world a place that's going to give me what I need, meet my needs? Or is it a place that's going to, is the world a place that's going to take advantage of me? So depending how you answer those two questions will determine what the shape of your internal working model. And your work in building a relationship with a child who's been harmed, your work is about shaping their internal working model. And this is so incredibly important because you can determine in what you do with that child, whether you're a carer or a worker, what their trajectory is going to be, not just through their childhood, but into their adulthood, by the work you do to shape their internal working model, the way they view the world. And it works a bit like if they feel valued by you, they will then go to value things out there in the world. If they don't feel valued by you or the world, then they won't know how to value stuff. And when you don't know how to value stuff, you tend to break it, steal it, throw it away, discard it, don't appreciate it, don't feel excited when somebody gives you something like a present, and so forth. Yeah. So how the credits in the vase works. Generally speaking, is if a child's living in a world where adults around them are taking care of their needs from infancy right through, they'll be getting credits in the vase all the time, every day. Somebody will be putting credit in their vase. And a credit in the vase when you're an infant is a bit like, oh, you're crying, I think you need to go to sleep. And so they start singing you a song, go to sleep, da 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 da. And the baby goes off to sleep. That's a credit in the vase because you're meeting the need of the child. You're recognizing, you're in your thinking mind, recognizing what the infant needs and attending to their need. And that their little brain goes, oh, I must be liked. I must be valued because somebody's attending to my needs. And it can happen in all sorts of ways. A child falls over at school and a teacher comes up and says, oh, that's no good. Here, come on, well, let's fix that. We'll wash it and clean it and we'll put a Band-Aid on. Here's a lolly and back out you go into the playground. And the child feels like, gee, that was nice of that adult to look out for me in that way. Fantastic. Credits in a vase can also be such things as, I love that painting you did. Look at that beautiful green and yellow. Those are great colour choices. That's a credit in their vase. You're admiring something about what they did, rather than going, oh, well, try harder now. Try harder next time. Try not to get the crayon over the line. I don't know how many of you had that experience. I did. Unfortunately, it was the nuns back in the Catholic school in the 60s where we were drawing. We had to keep the colour in the lines, and if you went outside, you were told off. So consequently, I am not an artist, unfortunately, not a drawing one anyway, of that type. And we need these credits. And notice they're credits. So credits suggest you can spend them. And it's true, you can spend them. So for instance, if you had a family dog that died and you're very sad, you might lose a credit in your vase. If someone says you're an idiot or you're stupid and you feel a bit shamed, you might lose a credit. But the idea is that you're putting more credits in than taking credits out. But there is a relationship here, and it's 1 to 5. For every negative experience, poor experience you have, you need 5 credits to get you back to where you were before. So if someone says to a child in school, says in a classroom, a teacher says, or a teacher's aide says, excuse me, Johnson, why aren't you as good as Smith and Robertson? They're doing a much better job than you. That teacher would have to put 5 credits into the vase of that child moving forward to get back to where they were just before they made that statement. So these taking out of credits ultimately have a bigger impact than putting in. In other words, you've got to put more in when some are taken out. But a child who gets what they need, their vase is full of credits, and if as opposed to this child over here who's had adverse childhood experiences, when you've had adverse childhood experiences such as sexual, physical, emotional abuse and neglect, the tendency is that your vase gets cracked, it's vulnerable. It's broken, cracked in some way. And what these kids tend to do is they want to create some sense of safety around themselves, and they tend to think of it as a brick wall or a barbed wire they put around their internal working model. And it's very hard to get access to this. And you need access to this because you want to move from here to here. And the way we do that is by building the connection, the relationship with the child, and by putting credits in their vase, even when they might not want you to do that. And I'll give examples of how you can. And so if a child comes up to this kid and says, you know, go away, I don't like you, they might lose a credit, but it doesn't destroy them. It tends to bounce off because of the theme beginning with R. And R, of course, stands for resilience. So credits in the vase, strong internal working model gives us resilience, because there will be, for all of us, stuff that's going to happen out there in the world that we are going to have to manage in some way. And the stronger you are internally, the better able you are to manage those situations out there in the world. But when someone comes up to this child, the one who's had these adverse childhood experiences, and says, you're hopeless, you're no good, they tend to absorb that right in. They absorb it right into their internal working model. And so what they do is they believe what you've told them. You're no good, you're hopeless. What their internal working model gets shaped to believe, I'm no good and I'm hopeless. I'm never going to amount to much. I can't do any good. That's the shape of their model. And so we have to change that. Now, as I said, when you first start this work, that is put credits into children's VARs. When you first start this work, it's not easy, because very often when you say, "Hey Sam, it's really good to see you. I'm so pleased you're here today," they say, "Get stuffed," or they withdraw.
I understand.
Oh, that's Siri, my watch, speaking out then. Be quiet. She said, "I'm not sure I understand." Well, let me repeat it. So it is absolutely important that you understand with credits in the VARs, you'll shape their internal working model and thus the relationship. So here's a couple of ways that you can do it, particularly at the beginning of a relationship when kids might not trust you and they might not want to listen to what you have to say when you're trying to put credits in their VARs. And I have to say, it's possible to put credits into a child's VARs even when they are behaving abhorrently in ways that you just can't believe. We can still put credits in their VARs to tell them that they're a good person. And I'll give some, illustrate this in a couple of different ways. So let's say you've come home and this child has knocked over your favourite vase that's been handed down by your great grandfather or grandmother. It's travelled 13 billion light years. For those of you who have been watching, keeping up with those beautiful photos, it's that reference, but it's travelled a long way and they've smashed it. Part of you wants to go, "How dare you, after everything I've done for you?" But because you've come to this webinar, you know that's not the most helpful thing to do. Instead, you decide, is there some way I could put credits in their vase under these circumstances? And no, you don't do it by going, "Oh, that was such a wonderful shot. The way that you threw that vase against the wall. You're so strong. Well done." That's not what I'm getting at. But this is how we might do it. The first is you've got to be curious. And you might say, "That's very unfortunate that that vase had a lot of meaning for me. I guess you were feeling so angry that you wanted to hurt me." So you might say that as a beginning. The next thing, rather than go to your room, the interesting, I don't know if I said this before, just as an aside, when we tell kids to go to their room, it always fascinates me what we expect is going to happen. You know, you've got a disruptive kid, yeah, you say, "Go to your room." And so the child goes off to their room and they get inside their room, and I don't know what we expect. Maybe we expect this is going to happen. "Oh, I've been sent off to my room to think about what I have done. Maybe I should do some yoga to calm down. I need to reflect on what I did. Yes." And then I come out and say, "Oh, foster mummy and foster daddy, I'm terribly sorry what I did. I won't do it again. Thank you for giving me some isolation time in order to use my thinking mind to think about what I've just done. I'm feeling much better and I'm ready to move on." You know, it's really, when I hear it, it's kind of, when we think about it, it's a bit silly. You know, imagine, we'll just cartoon it a bit. We've got a little infant who's screaming, yelling, and so we throw them in their bedroom and say, "When you stop crying, come out and I'll feed you." How many are going to do that? None of us, I would hope. So why don't we do it with a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old? Remember I said, often these children have not met their developmental milestones, so they don't have the skills to do what we want them to do. If they had the skills, well, as you say in Queensland, skills, it's my Kiwi accent coming out. Skills, what skills? Skulls, that's a skull, no a skill. Anyway, if they had the skills, they wouldn't have to be sent to their room, because instead of smashing the vase, they'd be going, "Listen, I'm really angry with you. I don't think it's fair what you said to me, that I can't go out tonight." That's what someone with good communication skills will do. "So I'm angry. Let's talk about it." But they don't have the skills. So if they don't have the skills, what's the point of sending them to their room, pretending they're going to have the skills to calm down? Now, kids do calm down eventually, because you can't keep that level of elevatedness, energy, and they do come out. And they might say, "I'm sorry," and all this kind of stuff. But guess what they've learned about adults? Don't get close to adults, because when you need them, they won't be there. They'll send you off. Children who are heightened or withdrawing need adults to get closer to them, not further away. And that can be really hard if you've got, you know, this vase has been broken, you're feeling really upset about it. But you are the adult. Remember in the Cartman's triangle, you've got to step out of getting yourself caught in there. Don't be the victim. It's really unfortunate. You might have to deal with it with another adult to say, I'm really upset about this. This was my granddad's, whatever it happened to be. But we've got to deal with the child and the vase. So it might look something like this. And if I can't talk to the child directly, there's what we call a two-hander and a one-hander. So if the child's broken the vase and I think they're not going to hear anything I have to say, the two-hander is this. If there's someone else in the house, say Danny's in the house, and Danny's another adult. Lisa's the one that broke the vase. I don't know if everyone can see Lisa. I assume you. I don't know what you see. You know, you're seeing me. You won't see Lisa. Anyway, there's Lisa and there's Danny. So I say to Danny, Danny, gee, I imagine Lisa must have been really angry to break that vase. She knew it was my favourite. I'm a wee bit upset about it. But I didn't realise that she was so angry with me. I guess it was the only way that she could tell me just how angry she was. Now, Danny, because he's in the room, he would, of course, not sit there silently looking at me. He would use his words to say something like, he's got to find his microphone thing.
There we go.
Right? You're going to say in response to my, see, I've caught you on the hop here. He's going, what the hell's, I'm just doing the tech stuff here. What has he caught me on the hop?
You have a bit.
Yeah. So you'd say something like, gee, she must have been really angry. I can see that. I wonder what it was that she was angry about. And then what happens is the two adults have a conversation with Lisa there. And what I know about this is a trick of the neurology of the brain, is when adults talk about a child and the child can hear, the child goes, huh? What's going on here? And as long as you talk respectfully about the child, they will listen. If you talk disrespectfully about the child, they'll come and just attack because it'll be a Cartman's triangle. So that's the two-hander. Thanks, Danny, for your assistance. Next, we have the one-hander, whereas there's only Lisa and me and there's no one else. And somehow I've got to talk to her, but I can't talk directly to her because if I talk directly, she's going to come out fighting. So I look for an object. Ah, there's a wall in the house. And I go, hello, wall. Did you see what happened, wall? Lisa, she was really angry. She broke that favourite vase of mine. I guess she couldn't find any other way of telling me just how angry she was. I must have missed it. That's on me. And Lisa again goes, huh? So that's the first part of the conversation that we want to talk about. That is, I just want to acknowledge what happened. And now here comes the credits in the vase work. I say to Lisa, Lisa, what do you think we should do now? Now, notice I've said, what do you think we should do? I'm not saying, what do you think you need to do? I'm saying, whatever we need to do, I want to bring you closer to me and I want it to be us do it together. So I say, Lisa, what do you think we should do now about this vase? What does Lisa say?
I think that we could try and fix it.
That's a great idea. Hey, well done for coming up with a great idea. So there we have a credit in the vase when it's a difficult situation. Yeah, I wonder what we'd need to fix it. If we had a go at that, what do you think we might need?
Blue tack and glue and rubber bands.
Great idea. I say, we should go looking for those. Let's see who can find the rubber bands first. Are ready, set, go. Where are those rubber bands? Lisa comes, oh no, rubber bands. You beat me, you're so quick. Well done. Now the glue, we don't have any glue in the house anymore. Where could we go and get glue since we don't have any in the house, Lisa?
We have to go to Kmart.
Kmart. That sounds like a good idea. I tell you what, let's go together. And here, I'm giving you the $5, so you get the glue and go up to the counter and you buy the glue. You have a go at it. See how it goes. So off we go together. Pays for the glue. You spoke to that shop assistant so well, Lisa. Well done. I thought that was fantastic. And you were so courageous, even though you're a bit nervous, you went up and you bought it and you took the change. Hey, by the way, you can keep the change. Put it in the vase. We come back. We start repairing the broken vase. And I say, look at that. What's broken, we can repair. Fascinating. And of course, that's the philosophical lesson. What is broken can be repaired. Lisa, you can be repaired. Now, there are different ways you can do that. I've only got time to show you that little example, but you can see how we're putting credits in the vase while we're dealing with a difficult situation. Now, some would say, but she broke the vase. She needs to go to a room. She needs to do this. But she's taken responsibility. So I might finish off with Lisa. You took responsibility for the broken vase. I really, really admire that. That took courage. More credits in the vase. One of the thoughts I have, though, is I've noticed that when you get really angry, your tendency is to want to break some stuff. And I'm wondering what we might need to do to find a different way to deal with that anger so that we don't have to break stuff. Because I imagine that you might get a bit scared at the bigness of your anger sometimes. And that when you break stuff, you're probably not feeling too happy about that. So these are the sorts of conversation. And the only way I can have that conversation with a child is if I'm breathing. If I'm not breathing, I'm going to have problems. Oh, sharing. Where's that share thing? Share. Oh. So I'm going to talk a bit about behaviour change, and I want to give us some time for questions. And this is in relation to relationships. I've shown you this before if you've come to one of the webinars. I can't remember which one I showed it, and it might have been the last one. I can't recall. But sometimes people ask me, how long does it take to change behaviour when it's not meeting expectations? We could replace this question with how long does it take to build a relationship? And a relationship, really, when we think about it, are two people coming together and behaving in certain ways that allow that relationship to grow. So in the first 6 to 12 weeks, as you're building this relationships, you might see some small shifts in the connection between you and the child. You're still going to see most of those challenging behaviours, but you might begin to see a few shifts. At the 3 to 6 month mark, depending on how you've moved through this reconnaissance and intelligence gathering and border incursions phase, you'll see sort of what we call connecting behaviours about 25% of the time. You know, connecting behaviours are behaviours such as the child reaches out to you when maybe they're not feeling so good or they need something. They don't just take it. They start to understand there's some rules, the way that you operate within your household and routines and so forth. And they might be able to follow those about 25% of the time. At about the 6 to 12 month mark, it's sort of a 50-50. And this is just a rule of thumb. Some, as I said, take less time and some will take a lot more time, often depending on their abuse background. The intensity of the problematic behaviours, and they can be behaviours which are trying to separate you from each other, versus those that bring you closer together, it's about a 50-50. And 12 months plus, about 70% of the time, the child, in terms of relationships, will be sort of pro-social, wanting to be in a relationship, wanting you to help them to learn, you know, what to do and how to do it, and getting a sense that the environment they're in with you is a safe place and their needs will be met. And if you've managed to work your way through this and have the stamina to sort of get through those 12 months, then likelihood that there'll be really good outcomes. But the one thing that stop sharing again. The one thing I want to ask you to do, to invite you to do, is ask this question every day. Is the child in my care today better off than they were yesterday? Day 3, is the child in my care better off than in day 2? Is the child in my care better off than day 4? Blah, blah, blah. When you're asked this question, what you're looking for, what you're really saying is, if I were to look at expected developmental milestones of children, and you can think of all sorts of things. You can think of fine motor skills, being able to pick up a pen, gross motor skills, holding on to something big, a big ball, emotional literacy, being able to talk about feelings. There are a whole list gamut of things that we know. We know developmentally where a 3-month baby should be, where a 18-month toddler should be, where a 5-year-old should be, both physically and psychologically. We know this stuff. And to me, this is the stuff that our sector doesn't do well because we are not expecting people to do it. That is to track developmental milestones. Because it's only then when you say, is this child where I expect them to be today? No, they're not. Therefore, what am I going to do today to improve things? Now, as an example, if a child's reading isn't up to where they should be and they're 5 years of age, instead of reading once a night, I might have to find 2 or 3 times through the day that I'm going to read with them. So I might have to up the ante. And I want you to think about yourselves as a coach. You know, a coach doesn't say if we use football, or do we have to use rugby for Queensland? I don't know which one to use. What one do I use? I don't know. Footy, go the Lions, something like that. Anyway, whichever one you want to use. Could use netball. Coach doesn't say to a netball player, all right, here's the netball, off you go, get onto the court and play. And then you come off, had a terrible game, the coach doesn't go, tomorrow, next week, get on and play. What a coach does is observes, looks at your skills. What is your skill level? Actually, it's not quite what it needs to be. Therefore, I've got a training regime for you that you'll be doing in the next 3 weeks. And my belief is that you as carers and caseworkers should be saying, what's the regime we're going to put in place, say for the next month? We know where the holes or the gaps are in this child's developmental milestones. Let's create a plan. If the where they're missing is they can't pick up small things, they've got bad, when they can't find a pen, can't pick up a pen and write. Therefore, I'm going to get them next month to practice a lot more than they would normally, picking up pens or small objects to improve their fine motor skills. And it's as simple as complex as that. So it means you as a caseworker and a carer should be on a regular basis, if you're meeting once a month, it shouldn't just be a conversation about how's the child doing, are they doing okay, had a few upsets at school, blah, 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 and you go, yeah, okay. It should be about where do we think they are developmentally now and their developmental milestones. And you should be able to pull out a list because you know it's a 5-year-old. 5-year-olds, what do we expect of a 5-year-old? Blah, 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 blah. Which ones have they met? Tick, tick, and cross, 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 cross. Okay, these are the ones we're going to work on in the next month, or we'll pick 2 of them. And we create some interventions, and we do it for a month, and we come back in a month and say, do we tick it now? Or do they need more time? That's what we should be doing. Because otherwise, kids just slip through, and I'll tell you what their outcomes will be. They'll be very, very poor. Very, very poor. Share. Back. So if we sum up, just our little practice summary here. So building relationships takes time. Do not expect children to trust you quickly. It's not going to happen. Because if you think about your own relationships, it would have taken time for you to trust the person you were building a relationship with. It's your responsibility, not the child, to demonstrate that you can be trusted. The child needs to work out that you can, but you have to be the one that's engaging with the child in a way that demonstrates you can be trusting. And we demonstrate this by meeting the child's needs. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes if a child says, I want ice cream and candy floss for dinner, demonstrating you can be trusted sometimes means you say, well, this is not the time we eat candy floss and ice cream. We do have some dessert after dinner, but this is the time we have our main meal. And the child says, well, I'm not going to eat it. I'll just have ice cream, my dessert. Well, in order for you to have your dessert, you have to eat your main meal. Once you've eaten your main meal, we can then have dessert. Well, I'm not going to do it. Well, that's your choice. And we will have our meal, and the child's meal will be put there. Now, if the child doesn't eat, I'm not going to say, oh, starve the child. But what will happen is this: if they don't eat, at some point, I'll put their meal away. The child comes in and says, I'm hungry. I'm not going to pull out that meal because that wasn't the time. I'm going to say, okay, well, there's some fruit. Now, the child's not going to die if they miss a meal. But what you're doing is setting up the circumstances that say there are some things that this is how we operate. Food is important for all of us. And this is the time that we have it. When you place a credit into a child's vase, sometimes they might not, they might want to throw it back at you. You need to stay calm. Thinking mind, stay curious. And it's not the job, it's not, oops, go back. It's not your job to be their friend. It is your role to teach the child that adults in the world can provide them with what they need. Sometimes you will need to stay the course when it would be easier to give in. Sometimes it would be easier to give in, but you need to stay the course. We can't leave our children's mental health and wellbeing to chance. And this is our time for questions. Microphones on. Hey, I suppose you want to hear the answers. I was actually going to say maybe you turn everyone's cameras on and we can have question and answer, but you want to record that too, so forget that. But microphones on, so we can have questions, conversations.
They're on, Gregory, so I think people have to manually take themselves off mute, but they're enabled, so people should be able to contribute at this point.
I'm just going to read out why people are sort of figuring out what they might want to ask. I've just seen Jacob and Michelle's comment from before. If I can read it out. Our 7-year-old wrote me a birthday card. And when my wife asked him what he wanted her to write, he said, I love you, Daddy, but sometimes I don't. And those times are when you ask me to go to bed, with a smile. It opened up a great discussion when he was able to share his frustration of me in the moment. Fantastic. That's a great example. So their example of a carer inviting a child to give a solution to something. What should we put here? And then writes an honest message and then opens up a conversation. I imagine the conversation might have been something about how is it that I have to go to bed at certain times, and we could talk about sleep and all sorts of things. And done therefore in a space of curiosity as opposed to a space of tension. So questions, comments, experiences, anybody?
Hi, I just want to ask
Hi, Connie.
a question with regards to back to that moment when you were saying about the vase and what can we do. How do you approach the I don't know? Because we get a lot of I don't knows, and it's really
Great.
hard.
Yes.
You don't want to lead them down the path that you want them to go. You need them to help, but that I don't know is a real stickler for us.
Yeah, great question. So you will get the I don't know, and most kids do know something, depending on the age. of the child. You know, 2-year-old, I don't know, maybe you don't know, and maybe some kids don't know. So one of the things I suggest is when a kid says I don't know, we'll say, well, maybe we just need to do some thinking about it for a little while. I'll tell you what, but you go off and I'll go off and we'll both have a think about it. And I'll tell you, I'm going to put my timer on for 5 minutes. And then 5 minutes starting now. Siri just put my timer on, by the way. It said 5 minutes starting. I put my 5-minute timer on my watch or phone. And in 5 minutes, I come back and say, hey, Sammy, did you come up with any ideas? Now, if they go, yeah, I've thought about blah, 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 and the chances are they might give you something, start to give you, but if they don't, you can say, well, one of the things I thought about is maybe we could see if we could put it back together. What do you think about that? Now, ultimately, there will be some children who say, I don't care, I don't think anything about that, get stuffed, I'm not going to do it, I'll break the next one too. You know, there's always going to be that. But I want you to think about this work as you can't hurry the river. But if you operate this way again and again, the child over time, as the relationship solidifies, will get to the point where they go, I've got an idea. But it takes time. Don't expect it to happen the first time. You might have to do it 20 times before the child says, I've got an idea.
And Gregory, would it, when we have that response from children and young people when they talk about, I don't know why I did that or I wasn't thinking, they're operating in their emotion brain when they do something like that. So when they're throwing a vase, they're not actually thinking, they are responding, and so it wouldn't be unusual for them, once their emotion brain has calmed down and they're back into that thinking brain, to actually not understand why they did what they did.
Absolutely. So what Carissa's saying is this: we have our thinking mind, and what she's our thinking mind. This is the front part of our brain, and what she's referring to is the emotional brain. I call the reptilian brain. And basically, what happens when someone gets really angry and they've lost the ability to think, their brain's fired up and they've gone into their amygdala and the fight and flight and they're all out there doing stuff. And you're right, you have to get them back in to their thinking mind to have a discussion about what should we do now. So when a child says, I don't know, then what you should be saying, excuse me, we'll try and edit that out. What you should be saying is, okay, they're still in their reptilian brain or emotional brain. I have to do some work to get them to do this. And part of that work might be saying, oh, we'll just go and have a way and think about it for 5 minutes or so. And that separation for a few minutes, it doesn't mean you disappear completely, you can't see. In fact, you should still be able to eyeball the child and he or she you. You just go into thinking mode. And I might be a bit silly and go, whoa, what do you think? What are your thoughts about this? You know, go into that one-hander, two-hander. And spot on, you want to get into this space, his or her brain into this place. And most times it doesn't take long, but there are some kids who might get stuck in there because they get into this kind of, and you might just have to leave it until they're a bit more open, and then you can have a conversation. Now, of course, everyone will say, oh yeah, but what happens if it's tea time and the people might walk over the broken vase and so forth? Well, yeah, maybe you will have to sweep it up and put it aside and then come back and put it back down again and then say, let's come back together and start again, or put it up on the table or do something just to move it to keep place safe, or get some road cones and put them around the broken thing and you can have some fun with it. Tell everyone, don't go, watch the cones, here are the cones, put tape around it. We're coming back to that later. You know, there's all sorts of creative, and often I find with kids being a bit silly, not shaming them, not laughing at them, but you just being a bit silly, can sometimes take the heat out of the moment.
You've spoken in previous webinars about being the water and not the fuel, and helping children and young people to recognise when they're in that emotion brain and undertake that deep, that breathing, those techniques, so that hopefully they don't go into a space where they're throwing vases and, you know, being destructive, because we've actually given them some skills to recognise that that's where they are operating and help them to come out of that space and back into their thinking brain.
Yeah, spot on. You don't want to be setting the child up to fail when a child first comes into your care. That's why that assessment, daily assessment, is so important. Where do I think this child is in terms of their developmental milestones? Are they meeting the expectations of other children who haven't had the experiences they've had? And if they haven't, I need to train them to be able to do these things. I need to be the coach in their life to train them so they can go on the court and take shots and get the ball in the basket and pass the ball successfully and do all those things. And it's the same in life skills. You don't just become good at the stuff. We have to train them to do it. And you don't train them by putting them down and shaming them and yelling at them and saying, get to your room on your own and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't do anything. That sets you back. That's the losing of 5 credits in your VARs, and now you've got to go and try and get back to where you were just before you did that stuff. Excuse me. And it's one of the reasons I say this work is tough for us as carers and workers, because love's not enough. In fact, the love part is pretty easy. Someone's just, Jacob and Michelle have said something about what was it? Your Brilliant Brain book by Belinda Thompson has been a great tool. My 7-year-old now goes to school and teaches his friends about their meerkats. Fantastic. I know that book. Yeah, great. Well done. See, there's a good example of teaching and coaching the child to have some knowledge. And you can teach a child about their brains. It's fantastic to give them the knowledge so they understand when they're going off. They can go, oh, I see what's happening here. And then they have some skills to get themselves back in their thinking mind. But if you're just telling them not to do something and not do any skill building, we're setting them up to fail.
You know how you talked about that at the start, things go smoothly and then it can take about 8 months. What about the kids that are in kinship care where they're fine for the first 2 years, then they find out that they're not going back to their parents, and then those behaviours change with that reality?
Yeah, thanks. I think that was you, Tamara. Is that right?
Yeah.
Great. It is a difficult one. The interesting thing about kinship care is usually they have a sort of some form of relationship with the child. But it can be a little bit complex, because if they are the grandparent, as often is the case with kinship carers, not always, but often. And depending if you are, let's say that the perpetrator of harm was a mother and you're the maternal grandmother looking after the child, well, the child might have some complicated thoughts about the fact that you are the one that raised the mother who hurt me as the child. So what does that mean? Are you going to... So there are some strange sort of, we're getting sort of analytic way of thinking, unconscious processes that can be going on. And at some time, those thoughts come up from the unconscious to the conscious, and they have to be resolved. So you can see a child doing okay, and something happens, such as you're not going back to your parents. Now, we're assuming they get upset because they're not going back to their parents. But who knows? They might have such big feelings of relief, they don't know how to manage relief, and so they go ballistic. So don't just assume because of A, then B must equal C. You still have to think about, well, what in fact doesn't mean that this child's gone off when we've said you're not going back to your parents. Now, it could mean, Freud once said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. So A plus B can equal C, but you've got to use your thinking mind to determine that. And I can't tell you which way it's going to go every time. You have to collect all the data and go, okay, maybe it's about this. And you might have to check it out with the child. I can see you're really upset that you're not going back to mum and dad when you thought you were. And the child goes, no, I'm not. I'm relieved. I'm excited, but I don't know how to show excitement, so I just break something.
And it's that revolving door of grief and loss for our children and young people throughout their journey in care, that, those stages of anger and sadness and shock, and, every time a child has a contact with a parent, potentially, it could re-trigger grief and loss. And certainly a situation where the child learns that they're not going home could trigger, you know, that experience of grief and loss and put them back into an angry stage. So yeah, it's but what Gregory said about really determining for the child what that's about and how they're feeling about that is, you know, really important. And sometimes with our children having contact, their contact experiences with their parents, if it is only those 1 hour supervised visits, you know, in a controlled environment, and the parent is able to parent for that hour and they're able to bring them gifts and lollies and, you know, be the most amazing person for that 1 hour, it sets our children up to have these unrealistic expectations about going home. And so that just can often really trigger that grief and loss as well when, you know, they think they're going home, everything around them is giving them that message, and then all of a sudden the reality is that no, that's not going to happen.
And keep in mind that children can hold on to fantasies about what life was like with parents when it wasn't that way. And so sometimes as they get older, that has to be challenged in some therapeutic process. And perhaps I just had a thought. Oh no, I'm having a senior moment. It slipped away. There's a big mountain. I can't see. Deborah, I can see you might have a question. I'll come to you in a moment. See if I can find it. Just. Oh, got it. So keep in mind that this is not a smooth journey. So generally speaking, when you've formed this great relationship and everything seems to be going okay, the journey is not like this. It's more like this. So you kind of need your sea legs, because the child is going through developmental stages, even if they seem okay between sort of 5, 10, 11 years of age, everything was relatively okay. They got through school, but now they have to transition into puberty and into high school, all those things. This can be immensely problematic, and suddenly the child seems to revert back to where they were in the first few weeks or months that you had them, because all those fears and anxieties suddenly rush back up again, and they think they almost, have I lost all the skills that I developed? Because these skills that you're developing with this child may not be fully cemented and concretized in their internal working model until they become a young adult, because it does take time. Deborah, do you have a question? I see your microphone's off. Maybe it's just off.
Would that be me?
Sorry?
I was just making a comment that it can really take an awful long time for the child to feel safe, even if you had them in your care from birth, and then for some reason they weren't in your care for a few months. When they do return, I mean, depending on what happened, I mean, life can be pretty horrific. It's taken 18 months of solid hard work to get back to what I would call a really loving and trusting relationship again. So it's not always hard, but it's not always easy. It really is a roller coaster all the time.
Yes, spot on, Deborah. And the thing your comment reminds me of, when a child does, and if they do return home within 12 months or 18 months or 2 years, that relationship they have with their parents will have been impacted by the absence in different ways. And there's some relearning the child will have to have too. And that's why in my mind it's so, as carers are supported to look after children, parents who've had children go into care and they come back, parents need to be supported to make it successful. Because we see too often children bouncing in and out, back to parents, back into care, back, and it's not helpful for anyone. And if parents can't demonstrate that they've made some gains in their own work, then we have to be very careful about returning children to care.
Thank you, Gregory. I'm just mindful of the time, so we have just disabled the microphones. And I'm sure that we could all sit here for hours and listen to you speak and answer all the many questions that we had. I think some take homes, I always take something home from any of your trainings. And today I think what was really practical is around that the care team coming together and really looking at that question, where is the child today as opposed to yesterday, as opposed to tomorrow, and looking at those developmental milestones and really as a care team looking at where it is the child is, what are some of those developmental milestones that have not been met, remembering that trauma disrupts developmental milestones. And we've got lots of really good resources in Queensland, or processes or tools that actually support us to take a deep dive into that. So your education support plans, your placement agreement meetings, your case plans, having the Pajama Foundation angels, involved in your households to support in those developmental milestones. So we've really got opportunities in Queensland to do that piece of work really well for our children and young people. So thank you for highlighting all the things again today, Gregory. You're just a wealth of knowledge. I think I heard something the other day, and I just want to kind of finish it off with this. I was reading about a carer's experience of fostering, and she said, whenever I think about giving up fostering because it's too hard, I think about the children I foster for, and I think they don't get that choice. They don't get to give up being a foster child. So it shouldn't be easy for me to give up being a foster parent. And I think, gosh, in today's day and age, we need people thinking that way, because we do not have enough family-based placements for our children and young people. And we want our children and young people in family-based placements with those irrational, crazy people being their caregivers for them. So thank you once again for helping us, Gregory, to give the skills to our carers out there in our community and our workers, and we look forward to the next edition, and this will be uploaded onto our website.
Right, thanks everyone. Take care and stay safe. Keep up the good work.